A stunning scientific report recently concluded that alumni from classical Christian schools do better in college and career, are more independent of mind, and more traditional than graduates from any other type of school, whether homeschool, private school, public school, you name it. But why is this? Find out today on the Classical Academy podcast. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of the Classical Academy podcast, Season 2. This is your friendly guide to the world of classical Christian education. I'm your host, Dr. Keith Bueller, and I'm very excited to be back. We had a little hiatus there. I don't know if you guys heard the news about the coronavirus. We had a little hiatus, and we're back for Season 2. My guest today is Mr. Aaron Fudge, the beloved Dean of the Upper School, Chair of our Language Department, and a humanities teacher here at Trinity Classical Academy. Mr. Fudge is also a pastor and an avid surfer. Have you been surfing for a long time, Mr. Fudge? Is this a new thing?
I've been surfing for a long time.
I've
been on a bit of a hiatus myself, but now that my kids are surfing, I am back.
So the next generation.
The next generation.
Amazing. And you've been teaching for, as I understand, the last 8 years in classical schools, and before that you were also a language teacher for 4 years.
Yes.
So quite a breadth of experience.
Yeah, a little bit.
Well, we're excited today to talk with Mr. Fudge about the Good Soil Report. We're going to review what that is, but essentially it's a report of how well students at classical Christian schools are doing in life, in their real life, in their big, bright futures. We're going to be going over that and just getting to know what Mr. Fudge does at the school. So thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Mr. Fudge is here today to revisit the Good Soil Report. Now, some of you who heard our most popular episode from Season 1 last year with Mr. Wally Caddo know something about the Good Soil Report produced by the Cardis Foundation on the outcomes of alumni from classical Christian schools, comparing the outcomes from our types of students to those from public, private, prep schools, Catholic schools, and even homeschool. So all these different alumni from different educational backgrounds, how are their lives going in the big picture? And this survey was conducted by the University of Notre Dame's Sociology Department over the course of a couple of years. They had 1,500 respondents take the survey from ages 23 through 42. Believe it or not, we have alumni in their 40s that were graduating from the first classical schools back in the day. And what they did is they compared these respondents on all these different outcomes. And what the, amazing result is, maybe to us it's not amazing, Mr. Fudge, because we've seen this work. But the amazing result was that classical Christian school alumni are happier, they have more independence of mind, they have a greater commitment to conserving the Western tradition, and they have a greater potential to influence culture. They were successful in all these different measures that I know a lot of parents really, really care about. And we're really grateful for that result. We did talk about kind of the overview of this survey, but now we want to dive into some of the details over the next few podcasts as we look at, how do we get these results? What are we doing in the classroom and in the school culture that's bringing this about? Anything to add, Mr. Fudge?
I think that's fantastic. It's a fantastic study. It is truly a validation of everything we have believed and everything that we've worked toward. And to see the results of this magnitude, truly it is, you could talk about a magnitude in regards to how much better our students are performing than most of these other types of education. It truly is incredible.
It's interesting because you see educational fads every now and then. I read the news on this new school that's doing exclusively, dressing up and role-playing in historical periods to learn about history. And that's all they do. No books. Oh, gosh. That's boring. And schools that are doing, more kind of free play type learning methods and these things. And these fads sort of come and go, and you never really know, because you don't pay attention for like 10 years, what's that student like in 10 years? It just seems kind of like an experiment. But what we're doing is not a fad. It's more of a restoring a tradition that has already been tried and true. It's already been tested. So this survey, when it was done, the researchers, these scientists from Notre Dame, the results were so dramatic that they thought they had made a mistake. They're used to working with these small statistical variables, and they said, wow, these alumni are doing amazing. So we want to look at a couple different outcomes today and I'd love to get your perspective, Mr. Fudge, as a dean, as a teacher, as a dad, on some of these outcomes. For example, on the prepared for college and career measurement, they asked alumni, again, of all ages, from 23, so still fresh out of college, up to 42, parents with kids and careers. They asked them, how prepared were you for your job by your school? How prepared were you to read books, for example? How many of you finished your bachelor's, or what was your GPA? And what they found was the ACCS, the Association of Classical Christian Schools, of which we are a member, ACCS alumni are the best prepared by more than double the second highest group. That is what those are differences you think, we made a mistake. We're just exaggerating this. Again, this was not conducted by our people. This is an independent scientific survey. So can we just talk about college and career for a second? What do you think that we're doing directly that's working well to prepare our students for college and career twice as good as a prep school?
I think that's a fantastic question. As I think about it, one word that sticks out is the word paideia, and it's a word used in the Good Soil Report. It speaks of, it's a Greek word, and it speaks of education or cultivation or enculturation, but it's a much broader idea than our idea of education. When we think of a prep school or a home school or a public school, generally the thing that we are talking about is the education itself. It is the academics. When we think about what's different about ACCS schools, when we think about what's different about these classical and Christian schools, is that we are not approaching education as an isolated piece of a student's life. We are seeking to educate the whole man, some people would say the whole soul. And by approaching education in that manner, we are training them for much broader outcomes than just getting a good grade on this test or next test or getting into college, but truly to succeed in whatever they do, college, career, family, and so on.
So this idea of training a whole soul, I sometimes hear the word holistic tossed around as a buzzword, and again, in business or professional settings or in educational settings. Would you say we're trying to be holistic, or what does that actually look like in a classroom setting? Obviously we're not doing PE in history class, mind, body, and soul. But what are we doing that's holistic in a non-cheesy way? Yeah,
very good. I actually probably personally avoid the word holistic because I feel like it's more cheesy and cliche than helpful.
Yeah.
But the point stands. So I live primarily in the Logic School as I teach 8th grade Bible history. Up until this year, I was the dean of the Logic School. So as I think about our Logic School classrooms, there are a number of ways that we are seeking to train these whole souls in ways that are not purely academics, right? So one thing that we do, we use a tool called the I&B. It's an interactive notebook. And this tool is basically a spiral-bound notebook. The students take all their notes in it. They keep all their materials in it. Any handouts the teachers give, they are glued into it. And truly, if you think about it from a purely academic standpoint, it's kind of a silly practice. We waste days sometimes gluing in pages into notebooks.
I remember when I first got here, I saw students gluing in their notebooks. I said, it's a handout. Just put it in your folder. But no, it gets organized in that one place.
Absolutely. And the idea behind that, and we get a little pushback sometimes from students and parents at different times, but the idea behind that is that we are training these students to become organized. We're training them to become well-structured in their lives. And so by forcing them into this practice, the hope, and we see this borne out in rhetoric school, the hope is that they are becoming more organized on their own, so that when they get to a place where they have the freedom to organize however they will organize, they do so in a way that fosters growth, that leads them towards maturity.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's really like a professional skill, right? Like, I mean, if you have a complicated job, you probably have a day planner or a calendar or to-do list. Like, there's these productivity gurus that get paid good money to help adults do this sort of thing because it's an important life skill, and we're helping them do it even in a school.
Right, absolutely. If you maybe think back to your own junior high years, and you think about
I'd rather not,
the 3-ring
okay.
binder, you think about how you kept your materials. Did you keep your materials? I don't know that I kept my materials. And students sometimes fight the idea of something like the INB, and they will. You can see the outcome in the way they lose materials also.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some ways it feels like a very silly idea. But again, it's pushing them towards becoming more mature. It's pushing them towards development as people, even though this is a little bit aside from the strictly academics.
Right. So, there's classroom learning, and then there's these broader kind of skills, this culture we're trying to create of organization. I think even back to Adam and Eve, one of the things that is different from a garden, from the wilderness, is that the garden is organized.
Absolutely.
Right? So there's maybe something kind of human about taking your stuff and ordering it, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than just letting it be. And then somehow when they get to college, our alumni, they get through high school, they get to college, and somehow they're performing better than their peers. And you think this might be one of the causes?
Oh, absolutely. I think there are a number of things that we do here at Trinity and across ACCS schools that force our students to grow up, really. We do not subscribe to let the children be, or let them be who they will be.
Uh-huh.
Truly, we want them to be their best selves. And to become your best self, you must be pushed. And so by pushing them to be organized, by pushing them to keep a calendar, we are pushing them to be better people, to be people who approach life in a much more structured way, or a more holistic way, if you will. And these are little things. There are other things as well that we do that prepare them for college and career. So one example, again, I live primarily in the Logic School. I've been teaching 8th grade Bible history now for 8 years.
Amazing.
And the culmination of our 8th grade year for our students is the 8th grade oral exam. The idea with this is that they are supposed to take all of their classes or information from all of their classes and answer a question for the year. So one of the questions is, in what ways is truth known and to what end? Or another one is the world chaotic? Is the world chaotic?
Or ordered?
Oh, there it is. Is the world ordered or chaotic? And justify your answers.
That's a big one, yeah. I mean, these are all big, right? You could go to a philosophy conference or a theology conference on those big questions. And these are 8th graders tackling it.
Absolutely. And they're doing a fantastic job. I think back to my college, I think back to my graduate school, and very rarely was I pushed to do something in a similar way to what we're asking our 8th graders to do. And truly, having sat through 7 years of these now, our students produce incredible work. And it's practices like these, beginning very early on in their career, that prepare them for doing well in college.
They're graded on the orals, right? But it's not like a grade game. It's actually inviting them to care about a hard question, a deep question, and produce a thoughtful answer. I mean, isn't that sort of encouraging them to actually care about intellectual things? Even if you're not particularly an academic student, you still can care about this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the practices like this, like I said, they begin in grammar school. 8th grade is the oral exam. In 10th grade, it's the philosophy symposium. In 12th grade, it's the senior thesis. And Trinity is not unique in doing this, but the ACCS schools are unique in doing this.
Yes.
Our public schools are not pushing our students or their students to do similar things. I think you'd be hard-pressed to probably find a general Christian school or a home school that is pushing their students to accomplish things of this magnitude.
And there's something about standing on your own 2 feet and speaking. I know the students sit or stand for orals, I don't know. But metaphorically, standing on your own 2 feet and speaking and representing yourself and your thoughts to like a panel of judges. It's very nerve-wracking, right? Nobody, can do that without nerves, a job interview or an audition for a part or something like that. So by training students to do these types of things, like the symposium, they have to speak. It's a group discussion, but they have to speak their thoughts. The senior thesis, poof, it's all you, right? You're up on the stage. I noticed that when I taught college, that the students who were comfortable in a discussion on day one almost always came from a classical school.
Interesting.
I say, by the chance, did you go to like an honors school or a classical school? And they're like, yeah.
I actually noticed the same thing. So I was an adjunct professor at a local college as well for a little while, about a year, and did freshman English composition. And the students who performed best generally were students from a classical school as well. Speaking to that, I can personally speak to having graded freshman essays in the same year and probably same week as I graded 8th grade essays. And I can say that our students who are being trained in the progymnasmata, which is our writing curriculum, are being trained in ways that other public and private schools are absolutely not training their students. Our students are being forced from young age to mature quickly and to mature well and to walk in good directions.
That's amazing. And I think that there might be a factor, too, in the size of schools. Like, if you have a small class and everybody gets a chance to give a speech or to give a defense, and it's not overwhelming, but at certain thousands and thousands of numbers, that just becomes overwhelming, and then students aren't practicing those types of things. Let's wrap up this segment. Any closing thoughts about how we prepare students for college and career, either directly or indirectly?
I'll just emphasize again, I think the structure of our school, we have very rigid and specific expectations on our students, and students bristle at that often. My role as dean, I will often have to help students as they bristle against some of those expectations. But truly, as we push them to be their best selves, most of them come to learn and accept, and I think even appreciate the rigidity of our curriculum and of our school. There's a student that I'm thinking of right now who came to us and did not practice the policies and such that we would desire. And as we pushed him to pursue excellence, he stepped up, and he's a great young man doing wonderful things. But if we had allowed him to be who he was, he would not do the things that he's doing now.
It's what not Mortimer Adler, but Alistair McIntyre calls untutored human nature. That's our starting point. You don't want to stop there.
Absolutely.
We'll be back for segment 2 with Mr. Aaron Fudge, Pastor Aaron Fudge. Thanks for being here again. Welcome back to this second segment with Mr. Aaron Fudge. We're talking about the Good Soil Report and the amazing results, the outcomes that our ACCS alumni demonstrate on these surveys. This next outcome I want to talk about, Mr. Fudge, is independence of mind, what they call independence of mind. And that refers to, for alumni, do they read still as adults? Do they trust science and scientists, but being willing to disagree on particulars or willing to do their own research? Are they willing to disagree in public, which is a really interesting one. It speaks to our alumni not being swayed by consensus, where you just automatically fall in line. What's the popular thing to believe today? Oh, that's what I believe. It happens to be. Things like this are factors of independence of mind, willing to accept differences and challenge friends. Maybe willing to not support things like gay marriage or homosexual lifestyle, but actually knowing LGBT individuals and being able to maintain relationship. That's an interesting one that measures, again, independence of mind. So let's talk about that and kind of dial that in, because the alumni from ACCS schools demonstrate an incredible trust of science and an ability to disagree with particular theories. One of the outcomes, they said over 70% believe science and religion are mostly compatible, as compared to just above 40% in some of the public and private and homeschool areas. So these are amazing statistics. How many ACCS students believe there are errors in the Bible regarding science or history? The smallest number, just above, 20%, as compared to 55% of public school students, or even, this is interesting, even some of the Catholic and evangelical schools. They think, oh yeah, they get somehow indoctrinated, the Bible's full of errors. So what was your first thought when you read these sorts of outcomes? What do you see in this?
My first thought is that these are incredible results, right? Again, this is the thing that we've hoped for. This is the thing that we've sold ourselves on. We said, if we do this thing, if we train our students in the great books, if we train our students in Socratic discussions, if we train them in this classical way, even as we are recovering these tools, right? We're not even there yet.
Right.
But even as we do this thing, we will be training independent thinkers. This has been one of the Dorothy Sayers article that kind of got this all started. One of her big points is to help students become critical thinkers or independent thinkers. I think critical thinking is a bit of a buzzword currently. But truly, what do we see? We see that they are independent thinkers. And what does the study say? Well, the independent thinkers are those who are able to find truth and agree with truth, but then also disagree where they feel like something is either misrepresented or something being said is a falsehood, even if it comes from an authority. And I think it's an absolutely fascinating and affirming statistic. We're doing great in this.
It's amazing that, we can, I don't think our goal is ever really to indoctrinate. We obviously teach doctrine, but that term can mean kind of mindlessly stamp the students with their certain thoughts. Don't question it, just believe it, boom, boom, boom. And our goal is more so to teach doctrine, but almost like to cultivate the truth, right? Let the truth become visible to them while preserving their independence. How do you think, we both teach, in history, and we do a lot of Bible, we do a lot of Socratic discussion. How do you think that in the classroom you really, get students to read the Bible, trust, believe, but also kind of give them permission to push back? How do you approach that?
One of the things that I love about Trinity and about, again, ACCS schools in general is that we are asking our students to think with us. And we're not necessarily just feeding them the answers. And there is a bit of that. I think especially in 8th grade and 7th grade and some of these younger years, there is a lot of saying, here's how the world works, and we want you to see this.
You're confused.
You're
Stop
confused.
That.
Absolutely. Alexander the Great did. No, he didn't. So there is a number of areas wherein we truly do just have to say, no, you're wrong. You need to learn this thing. But walking right alongside that, we're asking our students to engage ancient material, whether it's biblical material, whether it's Greek material, whether it's Roman material. We're asking them to engage it and think about it. And so our 8th grade students are reading the best of the Greek tragedies. Our 8th grade students are reading Plato. Our 7th grade students are reading Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And they're being confronted with ideas that are foreign not only to them and to their family and to their parent discussions most likely, but foreign as well to the world in which we live. These are completely foreign worlds. And we're asking them to enter these worlds, to entertain the thoughts of these worlds, and really to inhabit in some ways these thoughts as they are in the class, and then to interact with them as well, right? And so we are forcing them, we've said it a couple times, we're forcing them towards maturity, toward thinking for themselves as they interact with these primary sources that are truly ancient, and bringing those to discussions concerning our modern world.
I think there's a saying, the past is a foreign country, right? So it's like, if you're reading these ancient sources, you're traveling to a foreign country, and we know that traveling gets you sort of comfortable in your own skin, right? Like once you kind of have been some different places, you realize, wow, like I have to bring my home with me. And the other thing, it was another Alistair McIntyre quote. He calls it philosophical imagination, the ability to empathize with someone else's like worldview, if you will. I know what you're feeling is empathy, but I can see why you think that. That's a totally different level. So you think that reading these books and thinking along with the students gives them that?
Absolutely. We enter into conversations about the nature of sin, the nature of forgiveness, the nature of anger. I have a student recently ask about punishment. How could God punish people if God is constantly telling people to forgive? How can he then punish? And so we're asking our students to entertain these ideas that are much bigger than them. I was not asked to entertain those ideas probably until Bible college. And so we are forcing our students to wrestle with these big ideas, and in wrestling with these big ideas, come to their own conclusions as they see the truth, and as we walk them through it. You talk about Socrates, and Socrates presents a problem or highlights a problem, and then essentially helps his students walk to the outcome that he desires. And so in a very real sense, that is what we are trying to do as well.
Now, how do you, because, we're both dads as well, right? So you're a pastor. How do you, as an authority figure, not just override these students? They might have some true thoughts at the end of that, but they also wouldn't have that independence of mind that we're cultivating. So how do you think authority works in cultivating an independence of mind, whether it's the authority of, an old master in the book or an authority in the classroom?
There's probably a number of ways that we could approach this. One of them is as we introduce them to these books, we are doing something that is in direct contrast with modern education, whether public, whether private. I think probably you could even say in most Christian schools, we are doing something that is completely different. The trend in education for at least the last 100 years has been new is better.
Yes.
And if there's a problem, you need something new. And instead we've gone back and said, no, Homer truly was the master. Homer, he gave us epic poetry as we know it. And that was 2,700 years ago. So guess what? We're going to read something from 2,700 years ago. And then as we force our students to read the masters of Greek tragedies, as we force our students to read the best of Roman literature and the best of Roman poetry, as we force our students to read the best of medieval philosophy, as we force our students to work through these ages by reading and interacting with, reading and having discussions around these masters and their writings, we are forcing them to sit under authority. And so I believe this is truly one of those areas where they are learning to respect authority without even knowing that they are learning to respect authority.
And that ties in with paideia, right? Like that you're being formed to trust these masters and say, you know something I don't. Even Homer, he's got some wisdom and some understanding about the world and human nature that I don't. He doesn't have to be right about everything. I don't have to, throw out every other book. But that's a humility, and that once you've taken on that humility and that approach to other people, you can take that out into the world and say, yeah, I humbly respect maybe the scientific opinion. At the same time, I'm willing to dialogue and maybe question, push back.
Absolutely. Well, I think, too, going along with this is the idea that as they are younger, there's a lot more hand-holding, right? As they are going through the Odyssey and the Iliad in 7th grade, we are directing their thoughts. We are directing their thoughts more directly than we do as they get older, right? We hold their hands as we walk them through this material and help them gain good habits of interacting with material well, of hearing the material well, of pushing back on the material well. And as they get older, as they move their way through rhetoric school, we release the hand more and more. Yeah. And so we talked about senior thesis earlier. By the time they get to their senior thesis, they are interacting with primary sources on their own. They're recalling things and discussions that they've already had, and they are truly producing something that is independent. And yet, it is something that they've learned while under the authority of these other masters.
And a lot of the senior thesis advisors tell me, it took about a month for my student, my senior, to know more than me about that topic, right? Pretty quickly, they're actually the expert in the room, which is kind of cool. Now you're holding my hand, this idea of hand holding, I think, is really powerful because, as a parent too, you're constantly passing off responsibility. Okay, I tie your shoes for X number of years, probably. At some point, you tie your own shoes and I pass it off, right? And then pretty soon you forget that they ever couldn't tie their shoe. And then, riding the bike, right? That's a classic one. But eventually it'll be driving, or it'll be, these big conflicts in relationship. And I'm going to give you input, but eventually you're going to internalize that and you're going to run with it. You're going to live your own life. But you may not get that if you are raised in, a school where everything is chunked up for you. Here's the next step. Here's the next step. Here's the next step. And you never get to dance.
Right. So one of the interesting things is as we get logic schoolers coming in, whether in 7th grade or 8th grade and above as well, one of the things that we tend to see is that parents want to solve their students' problems.
Sure.
And so as a student has a conflict with a teacher or another student, or there's a concern over grades or whatever the specific issue might be, the parent wants to step in. The parent wants to do the thing, right? To do it for them, to protect their student, and of course out of the love of their heart, and they're doing it
That's
from the best motives. And yet one of the things that we say specifically starting in logic school is if there is a problem, the student needs to address the teacher. If there is a problem, the student needs to go to that authority and walk with that authority. And again, it's this idea of the hand-holding. We not only are you doing it with the books they are reading and the discussions that they are having, but we are doing it with their interactions with their peers, with their teachers, with their parents. I've had many, many conversations with many, many students that we would not have had if we allowed the parents to solve it for them. Right?
Wow.
And
Yes.
the students would not become the young men and women that they are if we allowed their parents to continue to solve their problems. And
Right.
so again, if we go back to even what we were saying at the beginning, classical education is about the whole soul. It's about all of them. And so we're not just forming great academics or academicians, right? But we are forming people who are virtuous in all aspects of their life, or ideally virtuous in all aspects of their life.
That's right. And reports like this and this particular outcome, the survey indicates that it's working. It really is working, and that our students, our graduates, I should say, because they're adults now, they are able to enter into a group, understand what the group thinks, maybe if it's different, agree if it seems true, and disagree if not, and not just sway with public opinion. I saw this survey one time. It was kind of a meta survey that showed there's a certain segment of the population that they switch sides on controversial issues, and they don't actually probably have a strong view. They just switch whenever the majority switches. So like there's a middle 20%. They're like, oh, it's 51% the other way now. That's my view. And it's like, look, 70% of people agree. It's like, no, those 20% just jumped. Right. And that's not, obviously, that's not a rational move. That's just sort of like, oh, that's what everyone thinks now. Try blue. It's the new red in Wally.
Right. Right. Well, and that's exactly what we're trying to train our students not to do. Right. And by forcing them to interact with thinkers from a variety of different cultures and traditions and backgrounds, with a variety of beliefs about gods and demons and morality and whatever else, by forcing our students to read these, to interact with them, to discuss them, we are forcing them to not be those people. We are forcing them to become men and women who can think for themselves and make these decisions, and know when it's appropriate to disagree with an authority as well. As they discuss Plato and Aristotle, right? They are going to find themselves agreeing more with one master over the other master, and yet they're going to recognize the other as a master as well. And so we are forcing our students to become those thinkers who think in that way, who are okay with disagreeing with an authority if they feel like another authority has something with more wisdom or knowledge behind it.
And yeah, I was just thinking about even the authority of our Lord, that Jesus doesn't kind of stamp his disciples with the right thoughts. Like he tells them, I'm going to die and rise again. But when they don't get it, he just lets them be confused sometimes and lets them work it out. Maybe after the resurrection, they go, oh, he did say that, didn't he? But he asks them questions. Who do you say that I am? And so even the way that he uses authority I think is more of a cultivation than a stamp. Well, this third measure, Mr. Fudge, that I want to look at for today is kind of, in a way, the flip side of independence of mind, and it's traditional and conservative. I love the paradoxes in this report. Our students are both more independent and more traditional. That is what some people might accuse you of being, hidebound and prejudiced or something. For example, under traditional and conservative, they ask questions like, can the government solve all your problems? What are good sexual ethics, right? Are they sort of whatever the contemporary culture says? What's the authority of the church, and so on? And our students, the outcome was, again, pretty remarkable. ACCS alumni read more non-religious books than any other demographic. Homeschool, prep school, private school, public school, read more non-religious books. Do they read the Bible more too? You betcha. Do ACCS alumni read more than 10 books annually? Last time I heard 5 was the mean average of Americans, and who reads more than 10 annually? Almost 90% of ACC readers are leaders, and that's an outcome that is, that we're doing pretty well on. So these are very exciting statistics to me as a teacher. That's what I want for my students. Do they believe the Bible is an infallible guide for personal faith and behavior? Again, almost 90%. We'd like to see that a little higher, but it's higher than even an evangelical school, which is around 73%. That's a big gap. Yeah. So what are we doing, do you think, that is somehow resulting, if it's not brainwashing, it's not, how are we resulting in our students being traditional and being conservative on some of these issues?
Yeah. I think it's incredibly fascinating because, as you said, they seem to be opposites, right? That you would be, and actually that's what our society says, right? If you are an independent thinker, then you're open-minded and you can entertain all the ideas, right? And you're definitely not going to be traditional and conservative. That's right. And yet, who are our students? They are the most independent in their thinking, and they are also the most traditional and conservative. So I have a theory on this, and I don't know, I can't say this for certain, but this is my theory, is by making our students sit underneath these authorities that we were just talking about, these authorities from 2,700 years ago on up, by making them think with them, discuss them, contemplate them, they are actually learning to respect authority in a way that modern education is not. So if new is cool, that doesn't quite rhyme.
New is always better.
Rhymed,
yeah.
Right. But if newer is always better, then authority is gone. Then tradition is gone. Right. And that's what our public schools are doing. That's what our modern education does. New equals good, therefore always new, always new. Whatever the trendy literature is, whatever the trendy new nonfiction is, whatever that thing is, that's the way we're going to do it. By forcing our students to do this thing, by looking to the ancients, we are forcing them to be comfortable with old and be comfortable with authority. We teach them again and again to mimic the masters. We teach them to reason with the masters, and we teach them that they are not the masters. Wow. And by doing this thing, we are forcing them to become traditionalists. We are forcing them to be traditional in their thinking, which is that place of respect for authority and respect for the thing that has come before. And so, again, I can't say with certainty, but I do believe that the very holding up of the great books, that does both of these goals.
Well, and you say forcing, right? But it's not. It's actually the opposite of forcing it in the end, because it's bringing them up to the point where it's like, do you see the truth of the tradition? Do you see why you would want to follow it rather than anything else? And if they see it, then they freely choose. It so happens to be not through groupthink. Right. They freely choose this view that we call traditional.
Right. Absolutely.
It's interesting how the opposite, right? You just said like, oh, if you're really open-minded, you'll believe, you'll doubt these things and you'll believe these things. But it's almost like that's just proof of groupthink. You'll be swayed by the group if you're truly open-minded. Right. What? So that's a really exciting one for me. I know, especially, I was homeschooled for most of my career, and I did not know how to question a professor. Now, I went to a Christian school, but I did not know how to stand up to a professor and say, well, I disagree, or well, I need to think more about that before I decide. I know you're insisting. And so those are skills I did not have in college, but our students, if they go to college, they could have a Christian professor, they could have a rabidly atheistic professor who sees it as his life mission, to take their faith, but they might just be comfortable in either case.
Right. Yeah. And I think we see that in our classrooms. As I have them in 8th grade, they are often timid, and it takes a bit of coaxing to help them to find their voice, to stand up to me. Right. One of the things I tell them at the end of every test is, one, check the math, because I probably did something wrong. But two, to really, as we go through the test, to check your answers, because sometimes I'm wrong. And sometimes they may
argue
have the right answer.
their case.
Argue their case, right? Absolutely. And so after we're done reviewing the test, I always give the class 2 or 5 minutes, however long it takes, for students who have questions about why I graded them in a certain way to come up and ask me about it. And 9 times out of 10, nothing changes. But every 10th time or so, the student comes up and makes a good case and says, "Hey, Mr. Fudge, I think I actually had it right." And I say, "Well, I think you did. Good job."
Nice.
Right? And that is what we're aiming for.
And if you can do that publicly, and other students see, oh, hey, this actually might be worth the effort. Then now you've got a classroom culture of pushback. I read this book by the CEO of Dunkin' Donuts. It's called Challenge Culture, I think. But he talks about the idea of pushback and how important it is in the corporate world not to just say yes, 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 and secretly you're saying no in your mind, but to actually, push back. And it's how important it is for leaders to ask for pushback.
Yeah.
I'm giving you permission to disagree. Go. And if they say they agree, that's fine. That's amazing.
Even with the discipline issues. So thinking about sometimes there is correction that is needed in the classroom. But one of the things that I tell the students regularly, yearly and regularly is I could see something wrong. So it could look to me as though X student is chatting away with Y student over something not related to class, and I could be wrong. And there have been plenty of times where I have called out a student who then says later, "Mr. Fudge, I was actually doing this." And so I tell the students, in the midst of it, hear me.
Yeah.
Say, "Yes, Mr. Fudge. And if you feel as though I've wrongly accused you, please come see me afterwards, right? And we'll talk through it." And again, it's this idea of my goal is to guide these students into maturity. It's not to make them imitations of me necessarily. Hopefully
carbon
my good
copies.
stuff, right?
Yeah,
but
sure.
that's the idea, is that we're trying again. Everything here is geared towards pushing them toward maturity.
Amazing. Well, I think that is the time that we have for today, Mr. Fudge. I want to thank you again for being here and sharing your thoughts. We are going to wrap up. There's a lot more in the Good Soul report. There's a lot more we could say, but we're going to be revisiting some other key outcomes in future episodes, so do stay tuned. Thank you again for joining us out there on the Classical Academy podcast. Hope you're staying safe. This is presented by Trinity U, a service of Trinity Classical Academy in Santa Clarita, California. Our producer is Shay Ramquist. Stephen Petrie is our audio engineer and overall just musical genius. Until next time, let's all continue to grow in wisdom, in virtue, and in the love of God. Thank you.
Thank you.